Number 10. The Half-Head Man. When it comes to surviving the impossible, nobody is quite as lucky as Carlos Rodriguez. This is the guy who only has half a head. According to the Daily Mail, Rodriguez lost half his head after a vehicle accident involving drugs and alcohol, in which he was throttled out of the windshield and landed directly on his head on the road. It caused a massive portion of his skull to cave in, and it was a miracle he didn't die. The doctors were forced to carve off huge chunks of flesh and bone just so that he could live after the incident. Today, Carlos is still alive and in relatively good health considering he's missing most of his cranium. The images of him are shocking to say the least. His horrifying appearance went viral after mugshots were released following his arrest. Carlos has even come forward to warn kids against using drugs and alcohol, despite the fact that he still uses both substances. Carlos had his accident at only 14 years old, but it hasn't stopped him from living a normal life, aside from his alleged criminal activities. Number 9. 127 Hours. Aron Ralston is one of the most famous survivors in modern history. This is the guy who kept himself alive against all odds for 6 days after a horrifying accident while mountain climbing. The story is so famous they even made a movie about it starring James Franco and directed by Danny Boyle. For 127 hours, Aron remained trapped in a crevice with his arm pinned underneath a rock. And according to Aron himself, he only managed to do what was necessary to save his own life after an explosion of blind rage. For any people out there who have seen the movie, they know that Aron actually had to cut his own arm off to escape the situation. After being stuck inside a narrow canyon in Utah, Aron waited as long as he could. Then, after 127 hours, Aron finally took the small knife from his multi-tool kit and amputated his own arm. But his escape from this gruesome and impossible situation was even more horrendous than you might imagine. Apparently, Aron's arm had been in the process of decomposing. This meant that his flesh was soft like room-temperature butter. Aron even claimed that when he first pierced his skin with his multi-tool knife, a putrid gas escaped. But not only did he have to cut his own arm off, he first had to break his arm clean in half by flailing against the rock which trapped him. Once his arm was snapped in half, Aron was able to saw through his own flesh and escape by climbing out of the canyon with one arm. What do you take with you when you go hiking to avoid this kind of situation? Do you always bring flashlights? What about a satellite phone? Or do you always make sure to walk on well-defined trails? Tell me about how you protect yourself so you never end up like Aron by leaving a comment below. Then remember to subscribe to World List if you haven't already and get more awesome content just like this video. Number 8. The Bundy Survivor. If you haven't heard of the notorious serial killer Ted Bundy, you've probably been living under a rock. And while the story of Bundy, his prison escapes, and his murders is astonishing enough, one woman actually survived a meeting with this psychopath. And her story is astonishing in and of itself. Her name is Carol DaRonch, and she narrowly survived the impossible. And she was also partially responsible for putting Ted Bundy behind bars. It all happened in the fall of 1974. At the time, Carol was only 18 years old. She was in Salt Lake City when she decided to drive to the mall and go to the bookstore. After leaving the bookstore, a random man approached her, said he was a police officer, and claimed that someone had tried to break into her car. But Carol got suspicious when she followed the man outside and saw that he was driving a Volkswagen Bug and not a patrol car. Still, this was the 1970s and Carol was a trusting person. So she got into the stranger's car and immediately knew something was wrong when the man pulled over in an unpopulated area. Carol panicked and tried to run, but the man pulled a gun and threatened to murder her. By some crazy miracle, Carol managed to fight her way out of the car and then run away. Just 4 hours later, the stranger who had tried to murder Carol killed a different woman in a fit of rage. It ended up being Ted Bundy, and Carol DaRonch ended up being his only surviving victim. Number 7. Stuck at Sea. Surviving being stuck at sea is no easy thing to do, and it's even harder without a boat. When Kate Henderson and Ed Cohen went on a fishing trip on a sunny Thursday afternoon, they never thought it would end so tragically. Everything was going fine until they realized the boat was taking on water. The engines had failed, there was no cell phone service to call 911, and the Mayday calls on their marine radio received no response. Thinking quickly, they gathered up as many floatable objects as they could. That way, when the boat sank just a few minutes later, they were at least able to float. Both men then managed to stay alive for 35 hours in the Gulf of Mexico. They used a strap to connect the two of them and took turns sleeping on each other's chests to try and fight off hypothermia. But eventually, a decision needed to be made. Ken Henderson was a pretty large guy and his friend was not. Ed Cohen was quite skinny and hypothermia eventually set in. By Friday afternoon, Cohen was no longer able to swim, and he was in horribly rough shape. Ken Henderson had no choice but to sever the line tying them together and then swim for help while abandoning his friend out at sea. According to the Daily News, the two men had been friends for 25 years. Ken Henderson amazingly managed to swim for help, but Ed died in the water. His body was later found by a fisherman. Number 6. Frozen Woman. A woman named Anna Bagenhome made history when she survived the impossible in May of 1999. She did it by having her body temperature drop to the lowest ever recorded in a human person. To this date, Anna is the miraculous survivor of the worst case of hypothermia in history. At the time, she had been 29 years old and studying to be an orthopedic surgeon. After work in May, she decided to go skiing. And this happened in Norway. While maneuvering around a waterfall, Anna fell headfirst into the water and got stuck between ice and rocks. She ended up struggling for 40 minutes while her friends desperately tried to save her from the freezing waters. By the time rescuers finally got Anna out of the water, she'd been submerged for 80 minutes. She had no pulse, she had no circulation, and she looked pretty well dead. A helicopter was called, and Anna had to take a flight for over 1 hour to the nearest major hospital. And here's where the miracle comes in. According to the report from CBS News, over the span of 9 hours, a team of 100 doctors and nurses were able to warm Anna's blood and resuscitate her using special machines until her body temperature returned to normal. Anna woke up paralyzed, with her kidneys failing and her digestive system failed. But then, after 2 months of intensive care, she made a pretty solid recovery. Nerve damage ruined her hands. She had trouble writing and cooking. She couldn't ride or bike or go skiing again. But other than that, she made a miraculous recovery. Number 5. Falling 33,000 feet. Let's take a look at another amazing record breaker. When Vesna Vulovic's airplane exploded 33,000 feet in the air, she ended up being the first and only person to fall such an outstanding distance and then survive. This happened on January 26th of 1972. Vesna had only been a flight attendant for 8 months before the airplane crashed while traveling from Stockholm to Belgrade. There was an explosion in the baggage compartment that caused the aircraft to break apart in the middle of the sky. Out of all 28 passengers and crew, Vesna ended up being the only survivor. She was found in the wreckage with 2 broken legs, 3 broken vertebrae, plenty of broken ribs, a fractured pelvis, and even a fractured skull. And even though she spent a few days in a coma after the accident recovering, she miraculously made a full recovery. As for how she survived falling 33,000 feet without a parachute, well, that's still something of a mystery. One of her doctors claimed that because she had extremely low blood pressure, her heart was kept from bursting when she impacted with the side of the mountain. As for why the plane exploded, there was apparently a briefcase bomb on board that had been placed there by a Croatian separatist group trying to gain independence from Yugoslavia. Number 4. Lost in the Yukon. Helen Kleben is another woman who miraculously survived an airplane crash, except that after her plane crash, she had to spend 49 days stranded in the Yukon wilderness with no food, no gear, and plenty of injuries. It all happened in 1963 when a single-engine plane crash-landed. Helen was the only passenger on the flight, and after being knocked unconscious by the impact, she awoke to find the pilot bleeding from his head but still alive. Helen's left arm was broken. It was negative 40 degrees outside and things were looking pretty bleak. Over the next 48 days, Helen and the pilot survived in the freezing woods by eating toothpaste and other meager supplies from the plane. The pilot had his jaw shattered and his ribs crushed. And all rescue attempts by local authorities were called off after a few weeks without finding the plane. It was a complete accident that a pilot happened to fly over the clearing where Helen and the pilot were camped out. He spotted the starving survivors and came back the next day to save them. They were just days away from certain death by the time they were rescued. Number 3. Skydiving without a parachute. It's never a good idea to skydive without a parachute. That probably goes without saying. In fact, I dare say it's not a great idea to skydive at all. Unless you're a bird, you probably shouldn't be jumping out of an airplane. But in any case, Lindy Harding survived the impossible when she jumped out of a plane and her parachute failed to open. She was looking straight at the ground from 8,500 feet in the air. It wasn't her first time skydiving either. She had jumped 9 times before. But all that experience meant nothing when her parachute was broken. She had to stare at the ground for over a mile while she raced towards the dirt like a speeding comet. By some miracle of the universe, Lindy managed to survive. Even though she hit the ground at about 70 miles per hour, she was out of the hospital within 3 weeks and back in school just a few days after that. She did suffer short-term memory loss and a bit of pain, but her injuries were pretty minor. It was an absolute fluke that her body didn't shatter on impact, making her one of the luckiest women in existence. Number 2. Eaten by a hippo. Everyone knows that hippos are the most dangerous animal in Africa. The chances of surviving a giant hippopotamus biting your face are usually 0. And the truth is, hippos kill more people every year than lions. Even lions are scared of hippos, but for some unknown reason, a man named Paul Templar was attacked 3 times by a hippopotamus, and he's still alive. He was tackled out of his canoe by a hippo while working in Zimbabwe back in 2015. Miraculously, Paul escaped the hippo's powerful jaws with most of his body still intact, though the incident did cause him to lose an arm. But the attack was far more violent than you could possibly imagine. The animal assaulted him 3 times. It first tackled him off his canoe like some kind of torpedo. The hippopotamus then clamped its jaw down on the man and ripped his arm off and spat him out. Then when Paul tried to swim away, the hippo grabbed him by his feet and began to swing him around like a dog with a chew toy. The hippo then retreated, leaving Paul laying on the grass with one arm missing and at least 38 bites on his body. He was grossly injured, and doctors thought he would lose additional limbs. It was a miracle that Paul made a full recovery. Number 1. Cut in half by a train. In 2006, Truman Duncan survived being run over by a train. And this is one of the most miraculous things anyone has ever survived. Duncan had been working at the rail yards in Texas when he slipped on the tracks while riding on the front of a train car that was bound for the repair dock. Duncan slipped, landed on the tracks, and then tried to outrun the train. He wasn't faster than the train though, and he was swiftly pulled underneath it. According to Duncan himself, it just felt like a monster. The train cut Duncan in half. It dragged him 75 feet and ripped apart his lower body, leaving just one leg attached by a single muscle. He then managed to reach his cell phone on his mangled hip and call 911. He was conscious enough, despite having been cleaved in half, that he then made a phone call to his family. After getting emotional and hanging up the phone, Duncan waited for paramedics to arrive while willing himself not to die. Today, Duncan still works at the rail yard. He's missing half his body, but at least he's alive. One of the biggest animals that you definitely wouldn't expect to be quite so large is the giant manta ray. This is the largest ray in the entire world, with a maximum wingspan of up to 29 feet. And no, the giant manta ray does not have wings, but it does have wing-like pectoral fins, which it uses to glide through the ocean. The giant manta ray is a slow animal, sparsely distributed across the globe. It mainly eats zooplankton, and even though it's so huge, the manta ray is relatively harmless. These are different from the more deadly stingrays that are out there, as these gentle giants don't have the ability to kill a person with a strike directly at the heart. However, one of these monsters could really easily drag you underwater and smother you if you bothered it enough. A single adult manta ray can grow to be 5,300 pounds, and they also live extremely long lives in the ocean, up to 40 years. But what's really interesting is the reproduction rate of the giant manta ray. For such large beasts, a single manta ray will only give birth to a single pup every 2 to 3 years. Plus, the gestation rate is about a year long. This means they have a more difficult time reproducing than other giant animals. Number 9. Elephant seals. Elephant seals are huge. Believe it or not, they're even bigger than walruses. According to the Scientific American, the largest elephant seal was recorded at being somewhere around 21 feet long, with a weight of over 8,800 pounds. This is a monstrous size, especially when considering the other fantastic qualities of the elephant seal. For example, the inflatable proboscis is quite a magnificent sight. The proboscis is basically a modified snout, completely unique to the males of the species. Elephant seals are also extremely noisy beasts. Males will roar and make horrifying gargling noises that sound a lot like a dying engine, but especially during mating season. Apparently, these noises are appealing to the female elephant seals. And what's even more disturbing about the giant elephant seal is that every year these animals undergo an unusual molt. They shed all of their hair sometime between November and March, which reveals a rather ugly skin that is dry, cracked, and often scaly. And their skin is thick. The skin of a giant elephant seal can be almost 2 inches thick. It'd be like wearing the skin of nearly 20 humans. And that's a really gross thing to think about. Number 8. Nomura's jellyfish. When you think about jellyfish, you probably think about tiny translucent blobs of jelly floating through the ocean. But there is one jellyfish that you'll be surprised to find out can grow to be about the size of an African lion. It's called the Nomura's jellyfish, and it's a certifiable monster. What's even more incredible than its size is just how quickly it grows. In the span of less than a year, this jellyfish will grow from a tiny grain of rice to being bigger than any person on Earth. And while its weight is definitely impressive, its length is even more impressive. The Nomura's jellyfish will span at least 2 yards in length, and it maintains its enormous size by greedily feeding on all the small plankton it can find, scarfing them down using its hundreds of microscopic mouths. This jellyfish is an anomaly in nature. It's completely protected by predators thanks to tiny little poisonous barbs all over its gelatinous body. If you were to be stung by this jellyfish, it could result in death. What's the biggest jellyfish you've ever encountered? A small one on the beach or something a lot more intimidating? There's lots of giant jellyfish out there that only occasionally come into contact with humans. So tell me about your experience with jellies in the comments below, especially if you've seen a huge one. Then be sure to subscribe to World List for more awesome videos just like this one. Number 7. Earthquake snake. You may have heard a story recently in which a massive snake caused an earthquake in China. You may also have seen the image of what appears to be a massive green snake slithering down a dirt road, crowded by hundreds of people. But if you look hard at this image, you'll realize it's a total fake. The snake is very clearly photoshopped into the picture. And to be quite honest, there's no snake on Earth this big. The largest snakes on our planet are anacondas, and they only grow to be about 30 feet long at maximum. They also only live in South America. But there is good news. If you're feeling annoyed by seeing these photoshopped images online and gullibly clicking on them, you'll be happy to know that the guy who made the image got some serious karma. According to Asia 1, the man was detained for manipulating the image and spreading the rumors. The earthquake that happened in China was very real, and 13 people were killed because of it. The man who photoshopped the image also claimed that a giant dragon caused the earthquake. This made such a big stink that the authorities decided to detain him for upsetting the public. Now that's some good karma. Could you imagine someone being arrested for creating false images or memes? I guess when the consequences are this deadly, I suppose it makes some sense in some situations. Number 6. Japanese giant salamander. If you've ever lived in North America and gone into the forest, chances are you've seen a salamander scurrying through the leaves on the forest floor. These critters are tiny, slippery, and very, very cool. But you might be surprised to know that there are giant salamanders living in the world that are about the size of a small dog. The Chinese giant salamander is by far the largest, but there's also the Japanese giant salamander, the second largest salamander species on the planet. These amphibians have been lurking in the fast-flowing streams of Japan for thousands and millions of years. They're basically dinosaurs, and they have some remarkable superpowers. The Japanese giant salamander is able to regrow skin, bone, and lost limbs. They can grow to be around 5 feet in length and weigh up to 55 pounds. They're also native to Japan, not found in any other country in the world. But because the giant salamander is ranked as near threatened, chances are they could become extinct in the future. They're at risk because of habitat destruction and, of course, climate change. According to the National Zoo, Japanese giant salamanders function much like other salamanders in that they literally breathe through their skin. Salamanders are some of the most interesting animals on Earth, and it would be a true tragedy if we were to lose the biggest of them. Number 5. The American bison. Did you know that the American bison is the largest mammal in all of North America? In prehistoric times, millions of these animals roamed all throughout the vast plains and grasslands from Alaska to Mexico. They lived in the Great Basin of Nevada and all the way into the Appalachian Mountains. But by the late part of the 1800s, only a few hundred bison were left in the United States, after European settlers killed pretty much all of them. Today, there are great conservation efforts being done to maintain a stable population of these majestic beasts, and there are tens of thousands of them living across the continent. A male bison can weigh at least 2,000 pounds and stand about 6 feet tall. If you were to stand next to a bison, you probably couldn't even see over its back. These are the closest things to elephants we have in North America. And you might be wondering about the buffalo. What's the difference between a bison and a buffalo? And the truth is, there's no difference. The bison and the buffalo are the same animal. It's just that the scientific name is bison. Buffalo is actually slang, and most historians agree that the term buffalo came from the French word for beef, which is boeuf. Somehow, that became the most popular term for the animal, and even lent its name to the large city in upstate New York. Bison New York just kinda doesn't quite have the same ring to it. Number 4. The Goliath frog. The American bison is certainly a giant, but the Goliath frog is a giant in its own swampy world. This is the largest frog on the entire planet. A Goliath frog tadpole is roughly the same size as any other average frog tadpole. The difference is that Goliath frogs will just keep growing. They grow and grow and continue to grow until they've reached the size of a small house cat. The Goliath frog even looks like any other frog, it's just really giant. It takes about 12 months for the frog to mature to its full size, at which point it can be over a foot long and over 7 pounds. Also, the Goliath frog is able to jump roughly 10 feet forward. So good luck trying to catch one of those frogs in your butterfly net. According to the San Diego Zoo, these monstrous amphibians only live near the equator in Western Africa. They eat insects, fish, and other frogs. And apparently, a researcher even once found a half-digested bat inside the belly of a Goliath frog. Number 3. The Blakiston's fish owl. Have you ever heard of a fish owl? If not, be prepared to be surprised. The Blakiston's fish owl is the largest living species of owl that we have on the planet. The creature looks like a weird mix between a puffy barn owl and a predatory eagle. The male can weigh up to 8 pounds, while the female can grow to be over 10 pounds. Female owls are typically 25% larger than their male counterparts. As an endangered bird, the Blakiston's fish owl is seldomly seen. It lives primarily throughout the remote region of eastern Russia and in the north of Japan, Korea, and China, and it's unclear how many are left in the wild. Some estimates place their numbers between 1,500 and 3,500, but nobody really knows for sure. What's really fascinating about fish owls is that they have evolved into specialized hunters. And they specialize in hunting fish, meaning they must stay close to rivers and streams where food is available. And this is unlike other owls, which can easily hunt for mice and other small rodents that are plentiful throughout the forest. Number 2. Giant African snail. Snails are kind of gross. Let's just get that out of the way first. Whether you have slimy snails eating all the vegetables in your garden or ruining your aquarium, snails are gross and often annoying. And if the idea of touching one of these slimy monsters freaks you out, you might want to close your eyes. The next surprisingly large animal is the giant African snail, which is the largest terrestrial mollusk ever discovered. The shell of the giant African snail can be about 8 inches long. While it's obviously not as large as an elephant or a bison, it's pretty impressive for a mollusk. But let's talk about the diet of the giant African snail. It's large enough to cover most of your hand, and it has an appetite like no other animal on Earth. The giant African snail will eat a variety of over 500 different types of plants: fruits, vegetables, houseplants, and anything else. They can wipe out a small farm overnight and leave nothing but slimy snail poop in their wake. Number 1. Chan's Megastick. We've all seen a stick bug before. These strange bugs are tiny and look just like sticks, making them extremely difficult to find out in the wilderness. But there's actually something called the Chan's Megastick, and it's the biggest stick bug on Earth, with a possible length of up to 22 inches. It's still extremely elusive, just like any average stick bug. The big difference is that the Chan's Megastick is nearly 2 feet long. It has a slender body and is able to blend in perfectly with sticks and leaves. This enormous stick bug was first discovered by a local villager in Malaysia back in 1989. The largest specimen discovered so far is now located at the Natural History Museum in London. Because the insect is so rare and so strange, nearly nothing is known about its biology or its lifestyle. Scientists do know that the Chan's Megastick lives extremely high in the canopies of tropical rainforests, making more specimens basically impossible to find. El Caminito del Rey is one of the most treacherous places on Earth. It's also known as the King's Little Pathway, and it's an extremely dangerous wooden path located in Spain. The pathway spans the El Chorro Gorge, and it's one of the most dangerous crossings that anyone can make. The path was originally built in 1901, so that right there, that's the first red flag. It was made to provide easier access to the hydroelectric plants on the other side of the gorge. It reportedly took about 4 years to finish, and just recently it was renovated. Spain hopes that the renovations will draw more visitors to the crossing, but it's still pretty treacherous. So why is it so dangerous? Well, the path itself is only about 3 feet wide. There are no handrails. Much of the concrete path is broken and fallen into the gorge, and underneath the precarious walkway is a 300-foot drop to your doom. It's been estimated that at least 4 deaths have occurred due to the instability of this pathway. Nonetheless, it remains a widely popular tourist spot where people risk their lives just to get some cool photos. The only lucky thing is that nowadays visitors crossing the pathway will be given helmets and access to security ropes so that they can't fall to their deaths. But still, it's a nerve-wracking experience. Would you ever consider traveling this pathway? What about other dangerous roads or bridges? Have you had similar scary brushes with death? Definitely tell me your story in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to World List for more incredible videos just like this one. Number 9. A crack in Kenya. There's nothing quite more terrifying than staring into a literal split in the earth. In 2018, a giant crack was found in Kenya that appeared to have split the earth in two. According to the report from CBS News, the split came overnight. It's 50 feet deep and about 65 feet across. Imagine if this happened in a major city. People would think that maybe it was an alien invasion. It would swallow cars, people, and businesses. Luckily, this happened in the middle of nowhere. According to a geologist with the Smithsonian, the crack probably formed over thousands of years and was only exposed because of a recent rainstorm. The crack itself was caused by tectonic plates inside the Earth, which move about 1 inch every year. The same geologist said that in 50 million years, Africa will probably split in half because of those tectonic plates. The crack will only get wider and wider over time. But what's really interesting is that the giant split in Kenya has become something of a tourist attraction. Even though it's incredibly dangerous and the Earth could give way near the edges and send an unsuspecting visitor deep into the bowels of the planet, or at least 50 feet deep, they continue to lean over the edge and take photographs anyways. I guess people are simply insane and willing to risk their life and limb for that ultimate selfie. Number 8. The Cliffs of Moher. No trip to Ireland is complete without visiting the Cliffs of Moher. They really do look like the walls at the end of the earth. If you move west from the Cliffs of Moher, the next piece of land you hit is Newfoundland in Canada. It's one of the most breathtaking places on the planet, and it's visited by thousands and thousands of people throughout the year. But not all the visitors make it back to Dublin alive. The Cliffs of Moher is one of the most dangerous locations for taking a selfie. People will do absolutely anything to get an interesting photo. They hang off the edge of the cliff, they sit with their backs to the ocean, just inches away from slipping to a watery grave. It really is kind of insane. A recent report from 2019 has revealed that a man died at these very cliffs while taking a selfie. According to the Irish Times, the man had been an Indian national studying in Dublin. The incident happened in the middle of the afternoon on a Friday. The Irish Coast Guard were mobilized and rescue boats were put into action. The man was eventually located. A helicopter winched him out of the water and his body was taken away. However, he was already dead when rescuers found him. According to local authorities, it was nothing but a tragic accident. Witnesses claimed that the man was taking a selfie at the very edge of the cliffs and then lost his footing. And this wasn't the first time something like this has happened. A Hungarian man died in the same way in 2007, and the public has been warned multiple times about the dangers of walking along the edges of these cliffs. Number 7. Erta Ale Volcano. Out of all the terrifying places in the world, the northern Afar region of Ethiopia is the very top of the list. It's essentially like walking straight into hell. The ground is made of brimstone. It's a grueling trek through a place that's hotter than anything else on the planet. And at the very end of the journey, you reach a place known only as the Gateway to Hell. It's a remote volcano called Erta Ale, and you'd have to be a lunatic to visit this place. It's been erupting continuously since 1967, and once you reach the volcano, there's a chance of poisoning due to the toxic fumes spitting out of its mouth. You might even fall into the crater because of a lack of security measures. But that's only if you reach the volcano alive. You still have to make the troublesome journey just to get there. It starts with a grueling 5-hour drive through the barren desert, and then you must meet with a military escort because of recent issues in which the neighboring Etrians have been opening fire on tourists. Because of the extreme heat, you then have to walk through the darkest hours of the night all the way to the top of the volcano, while men with machine guns look out for bandits and terrorists. At the end of the journey, you get to stare down into the Gateway of Hell, which is a red and rotting pit inside an even larger pit full of cooled magma. It's one of the most dangerous things to do on a vacation, and yet people do it all the time. Number 6. Devil's Pool. The Devil's Pool at Victoria Falls is significantly less dramatic than Air to Ale in Ethiopia, but it's still a pretty risky place to go. Even though most travel guides will deny any previous deaths having taken place at the Devil's Pool, it still feels extremely precarious. The Devil's Pool is a small, shallow area at the very top of Victoria Falls in Zambia, where tourists are able to balance on the edge of oblivion. Because the Devil's Pool has a raw lip along its edge, it makes it extremely difficult for anyone to go over and into the falls, but it's still absolutely terrifying. From a first-person view, you're literally staring over the largest waterfall in the world. If you were to scramble over the lip and take the plunge, you would almost certainly die after falling roughly 350 feet along the widest sheet of falling water on the planet. And if that wasn't enough to give you chills, there are also fish that can bite you inside the Devil's Pool. And there might be crocodiles lurking nearby, and you could even get a nasty sunburn even if you don't get killed. This is definitely one of the most terrifying places that people continue to risk their lives visiting. Number 5. Half Dome in Yosemite National Park. One of the most terrifying places in the world is located in Yosemite National Park. Anyone who's visited the park has likely come across the Half Dome. It's a massive slab of rock that's known across the nation as being one of the most treacherous hikes ever. But despite how dangerous visiting the Half Dome can be, people continue to go there all the time. And yes, they also continue to die. One of the most recent deaths at Yosemite's Half Dome involved a guy named Sean Slimp, who told his story through Facebook posts of the woman he watched fall to her doom. She apparently slipped and fell under the cable handrails and began to slide uncontrollably down the enormous giant slab. Sean and his friends reached out to try and save the woman, but she was far too far away. The woman tumbled over 500 feet and died on impact. This happened on September 5th, 2019, and it's still unclear what caused the woman to lose her footing. But she's not the only person to have ever perished at this incredibly dangerous place. Since 2005, there have been at least 13 deaths, 291 accidents, and 140 rescue missions on Half Dome. The peak is 8,800 feet. And it's not for the easily broken. If you're thinking about tackling this terrifying block of granite, you'd better bring your wits. Number 4. Death Valley. Everyone knows Death Valley is the hottest and driest place in North America, and maybe even in the entire world. It's also visited by thousands of people throughout the year. The Death Valley National Park in California can reach temperatures of over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And when standing out in that kind of heat, it really doesn't take long to get some heat sickness. And even though this Valley of Death is one of the most precarious places in the world to visit, people continue to go there and they continue to suffer from heat-related afflictions. In 2019, a tourist even died while visiting the park at around 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. Her name was never released, but USA Today reported that she died before emergency responders could even reach the location. And this was the second death in just 3 days, in an area where emergency responders have been responding to heat illnesses and single-vehicle accidents. Single-vehicle accidents mean that people are getting so disturbed and ill from the intense heat while wandering through Death Valley that when they try and drive away, they crash their car into a rock. If you're feeling brave enough to head to Death Valley in the middle of the summer, you might want to think about being prepared. The park encourages summer visitors to drink at least a gallon of water a day while visiting the hottest and driest place in America. It's basically like walking through an oven, or at the very least like walking through a microwave. Number 3. The Death Road. The Death Road is just as dangerous as it sounds. This is one of those places that even adrenaline junkies are terrified of visiting. And yet it's a normal road used by the local people in the area. It's located in Bolivia, and it's one of the most dangerous roads historically in the entire world. And that's because it's about 43 miles of hell going through extreme mountainous terrain. The road is barely large enough for 2 cars to squeeze past each other, and there's no guardrail separating the road from a 2,000-foot drop. Plus, many sections of the road have been washed out, there are random landslides, and there are even waterfalls cascading across parts of the road. Each turn is extremely perilous. It's foggy, drivers are reckless, and at the highest point of the road, it's about 15,000 feet above sea level. Why is there a road there, you ask? Well, it's the only way to connect the capital city of the Bolivian Amazon rainforest with the capital of the country. The road connects La Paz with Codroico, and it's a necessary route for anyone looking to go into the Amazon by road. If you're looking for statistics up until 1994, records showed that at least 300 drivers were killed on this road every year. While driving, you can view innumerable crosses staked into the earth on the roadside, showing the spots where buses and other vehicles have driven straight off the edge. Number 2. Mount Everest. You might think anyone who visits Mount Everest and tries to reach the top is insane, and you might be right. Mount Everest has the tallest summit on the planet, and it's one of the most terrifying places where every year people still risk their lives to reach the top. And while this was once a rare triumph, it's starting to become pretty common. Everest has become a commercial endeavor, with ridiculously large crowds causing deaths, issues, and pollution. According to a recent report from the Colorado Sun, a radiologist from Golden was forced to walk over 2 recently dead bodies on his way to the summit of Mount Everest while climbing in 2019. The people had apparently died less than 24 hours prior, but the bodies were unable to be brought down right away. This is because people were so backed up in the line to reach the top of the mountain, as if lining up for a Black Friday sale, that the bodies ended up being stuck there in the snow. This is how dangerous climbing Everest can be. One minute you're standing in line to reach the top, and the next minute you're a corpse covered in snow. Number 1. Mount Hua. Mount Hua is perhaps the most dangerous hike in the entire world, even more perilous than Mount Everest. And it's not even cold. Visitors to Mount Hua must walk across a thin plank bolted to the side of the mountain, held together by nothing but kind of a few staples. The planks are located 7,000 feet up on the side of the mountain, and one wrong move can send you plummeting straight down the sheer face of the rock to your death. The mountain has a rumored death toll of 100 people per year, though that's never been confirmed or substantiated. Mount Hua is one of the 5 sacred mountains in China, and it's a pilgrimage site as well as a tourist attraction. It's so insanely overcrowded that many people believe the shoddy wooden planks that visitors are forced to walk across could break at almost any minute. This is definitely one place where you want to bring a parachute along just in case. Train surfing is an incredibly dangerous activity. It takes a real daredevil to climb onto a train and then try to surf it. And more often than not, something does go horribly wrong. But when a young man tried to surf a train in Paris, things went wrong way quicker than usual. It all started when a 16-year-old kid tried to do a stunt on the roof of the train as it was crossing a bridge near the Eiffel Tower. When the train began to leave the platform, he climbed onto the top of the train and sat down, smiled at everyone, and had a good laugh. When the train got moving, the kid got smacked by a bridge. It was like something out of a Wile E. Coyote cartoon. The young kid impacted the bridge, was thrown off the train, and sadly he died immediately. One witness reported hearing a horrible thud and then seeing the kid's body fall off the roof. Another witness described the teenager as being horribly mutilated after the incident. According to the news report from The Independent, one onlooker was so mortified that they had to be taken to hospital for psychological distress. And that's only one of the many reasons not to try train surfing. This is a deadly daredevil stunt that leads to unnecessary deaths. Number 9. New York on the number 7. Across the world in New York City, another horrifying train surfing accident involving a teenager unfolded in 2019. It all happened when a teenage boy decided to climb atop the number 7 train bound for Manhattan. According to the MTA, the incident occurred around 9 p.m. Unfortunately, the NYPD refused to offer any details about the death, but thanks to an investigative report from the Daily Mail, we know that the boy was killed on a track near Queensboro Plaza. We also know that the boy was only 14 years old. He allegedly hit his head on a piece of metal hanging above the train track and was thrown about 20 feet. The boy died at the scene, and it was quite a disturbing tragedy. It's unclear whether the youth was holding onto the side of the train or sitting on the top, but either one would be a horribly bad decision. Some of his friends gathered nearby while the investigation was underway to mourn the teen's death. The teenager was apparently a young man with a generous spirit who would have given the shirt off his back, according to those who knew him. He just made a bad decision, trying to be a daredevil, and it sadly cost him his life. So how about you? Have you ever gone train surfing? Or do you know anyone who's ever gone train surfing? It's one of the riskiest things a person can do. So tell me about your experience in the comments below. I hope that you won't try it though, and that no one you know was hurt if they did make this reckless decision in the past. But if this type of video excites you, then be sure to subscribe to World List for more amazing and kind of frightening content. Number 8. 10,000 volt accident. Sitting on the top of a train is one thing, but sitting on top of a train and grabbing a hold of a high voltage power line for balance, well, that's another thing altogether. A Russian woman named Alina, who was 21 years old when she climbed on the roof of a train near St. Petersburg, ended up being shocked to death when she grasped a high-voltage power line after slipping on the roof of the train. This young woman got 10,000 volts of electricity straight through her body and fell off the vehicle. However, she was still alive after falling from the train, but she didn't make it that long. The woman was dead before ambulances could even arrive to save her. Alina was quite the daredevil even before the incident. She was a fan of base jumping, scaling tall buildings, and doing any kind of adrenaline-fueled activity. Unfortunately, trying to surf the roof of a train would be her last display of courage. Number 7. Train surfing and lost limbs. In the province of British Columbia in Canada, that's where I live, a man from Australia got a little more than he bargained for when he tried to surf a train. But this guy actually survived, unlike most of the people who engage in this dangerous activity. He didn't get away scot-free though, but he did escape with his life. This went down when RCMP were called to investigate reports of a trespasser on the tracks of the Canadian Pacific Railway early in the morning. When officers arrived, they found an Australian man conscious and badly hurt. He had apparently been under the influence of alcohol and had fallen off the train while trying to surf it. When the man fell, he became trapped in the train cars following behind and was horribly injured. He was taken to hospital and had to undergo partial and complete limb amputations. The police didn't give any concrete information on why limbs had to be amputated, but, we can all bet that wasn't pretty. If the guy got any of his limbs stuck underneath the train, they were likely mangled beyond recognition. Number 6. The Berlin train surfing epidemic. In the German city of Berlin, train surfing has become an epidemic. And while you might think of this as a recent thing, it's only recently become known to the public because of social media. According from a study from between 1989 and 1995, there were 41 train surfing accidents in Berlin, with 18 of them having fatal outcomes. To make things worse, the casualties were all between the ages of 13 and 25, with most of them being between 16 and 20. They were also mostly males, and this probably has something to do with why women tend to live longer than men, let's be honest. All the accidents occurred in the warmer seasons, and most of them at night, and 50% of them were fueled by alcohol. Also, most fatalities occurred because of obstacles being close to the tracks and impacting the surfers, or because of surfers slipping and falling off the trains. While there are no single stories to choose from, the point is that in almost every major city with trains, ever since trains were invented, there have been dumb teenagers trying to surf them, and almost always with fatal consequences. So don't try this at home, it's simply not worth it. Number 5. Roasted alive. When someone is train surfing, you expect them to slip and fall off, to hit their head on something, or to otherwise become injured. But a train surfer traveling on the roof of a high-speed electric train in Russia was roasted alive while the train traveled 155 miles per hour. The train was actually halted when the passengers on board began to smell burning meat inside the carriage. The train was moving from St. Petersburg to Moscow, and the driver was forced to stop the train. It was then that the fire was spotted on the roof of the third carriage. It took a few seconds, but people soon realized it was a body burning as if someone had lit a scarecrow on fire. In this case, the burning scarecrow was Dmitry Mikulenko, only 19 years old at the time. The kid had gotten trapped on a pantograph, which is an apparatus mounted to the roof of an electric train that collects power through the cables that run overhead. The kid got all tangled up in it and was electrocuted so mercilessly that he burst into flames and was immediately dead. Number 4. Lavender Brown's brother. Next up is sort of a celebrity incident. Anyone who's familiar with the Harry Potter movies will recognize the character Lavender Brown, who was played in the films by a girl named Jessie Cave. While she may not have been the most important character, she is the center of this tragedy. You see, Jessie Cave's brother and her brother's friend both died while train surfing in East London. According to The Sun, Ben Haddon Cave and Patty Bolster, both in their late 20s, were found roughly 1 mile apart on the Underground Line after a horrific accident train surfing. The young man allegedly came into contact with overhead wires that were carrying 25,000 volts of electricity. The shock was enough to throttle him off the train and onto the tracks. He and his friend were eventually found later by firefighters and pronounced dead at the scene. This is tragic for numerous reasons. Both victims were really young and they had full lives ahead of them, and they could have been extremely successful. The families on all sides are broken up about the incident. And yes, alcohol played a huge role in it. According to the toxologist who analyzed blood of the victims, they both had blood alcohol levels associated with extreme intoxication. Number 3. Red Sox train tragedy. A Red Sox fan was electrocuted just recently after he tried to climb onto the North train moving from Yankee Stadium to his house. According to MTA officials, the train was going from Yankee Stadium to New Haven when Michael Vigint climbed onto the top of it and subsequently came into contact with overhead wires when he changed his mind and tried to climb back off. He surely realized the horrible decision he'd made, but by the time he touched the overhead wires, it was too late. Riders ended up being stuck inside the train for over 2 hours while emergency crews worked to remove the body and save the man's brother, who had also made it to the top of the train and was holding on for dear life. Alcohol, humans, and the roof of trains are 3 things that simply don't mix. Number 2. Stunt gone horribly wrong. There is another place where trains are often overcrowded and sometimes contain reckless young people hitching rides on the outside. In India now, recent footage was uploaded online that shows the grisly result of a train surfing incident gone wrong. But this incident is significantly different compared to the others from around the world. Rather than climbing on top of the train, the unnamed Indian boy literally tried to surf on the train platform. He held onto the train with one arm as it was leaving the station and tried to surf with one foot skidding across the platform. This might not seem very dangerous, and nobody probably thought much of it, until the boy lost his balance, slipped, and was pulled underneath of the train. The teen's name was withheld from the news, but we do know that he died instantly by being crushed underneath the immense machine. Number 1. Decapitated in Manhattan. It's honestly hard to say which death would be worse. Getting set on fire and burning alive would definitely be a horrific way to go. Being dragged underneath the train and crushed by it would also be terrible. And getting electrocuted by 10,000 volts? Well, that would be extremely unfortunate. But our last story is a decapitation, which might be worst of all. A train surfer was recently decapitated when he fell underneath a train in Manhattan. The man was not identified, but according to the Daily Mail, he died while surfing the southbound F train at around 3 p.m. in Greenwich Village. He was eventually found by authorities underneath the train without his head, and yes, he was pronounced dead at the scene. As for how exactly the man lost his head, it's kind of hard to say. Police at the time of the story were still investigating. The passengers on board the train were stuck inside for 2 hours while police combed the tracks. No accomplices were ever found, and nobody knows the motive behind what this guy was doing. If he'd been surfing the train just for fun, he appears to have been the only person involved in the incident. Maybe he was just trying to get a free ride. What's your opinion on this daredevil activity? How can authorities prevent more incidents like these? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and as always, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and see you again soon for another great video.